The moment begins at its peak, and that's why it falls. The stage is hollow, not in structure, not in sound, in spirit. Behind them, 10 flags ripple beneath artificial wind, their frayed edges illuminated by a light too sterile to mean patriotism. The debate hall hums with a hunger that smells like scorched wires and expensive perfume. The moderator's gavel quivers in its stand, unused, unnoticed. America is watching. Ron DeSantis is already speaking, not answering, speaking. His voice cuts like an over-sharpened knife, clean, decisive, practiced. A rhythm born of talking points and sharpened instinct. He stands tall, jaw set like sculpture, sleeves rolled up just enough to pretend he's still one of them. The crowd nods along, half listening, but wholly committed to the performance. He's good at this, at delivering dominance disguised as concern. "We are a nation of laws," he says, pacing. And when the left decides that feelings matter more than facts, when they rewrite history to coddle weakness instead of inspire strength, we lose what made America exceptional. A few claps, the kind that follow expectation, not inspiration. He turns slightly toward her, doesn't say her name yet, just eyes her like a challenge, like a placeholder for everything he thinks needs fixing. Michelle Obama hasn't moved. She hasn't blinked. Ron continues. "I didn't come here to insult. I came here to expose, to pull back the curtain on what progressive elites don't want you to see. Soft on crime policies, open borders, victimhood as virtue. That's not leadership, that's surrender." And then, laughter. From the crowd. The ugly kind, nervous, compliant. Michelle's face doesn't flicker. Her hands are folded loosely, the kind of stillness that unnerves. Her silence isn't weakness, it's weight. She watches him the way an avalanche watches a skier. Quietly, patiently, knowingly. Ron sees it too late. "I just don't understand," he smirks, turning to her, finally naming her into the ring, "how someone can talk about justice from a $12 million house while their city burns in the name of protest. Where was your outrage when small businesses were torched? When officers were ambushed? When kids were shot in drive-bys while the cameras pointed elsewhere?" He pauses for effect. That practiced politician pause, half pity, half triumph. Still, Michelle doesn't respond. There's a reason, because her opening line wasn't ready. It was remembering. She raises her eyes. Not angry, not defensive, just there, like gravity, like a quiet that doesn't ask permission to fall. Then, one sentence, one fracture in the stage. April 4th, 2009. The air shifts. Not because the date means something to everyone, but because she says it like it should. Like it's the key to a door DeSantis thought was locked behind him. She doesn't explain the date. Not yet. That's what unnerves him. That's what begins the unspooling. She speaks again. "I was in the back of a church, on the south side of Chicago, holding the mother of a 14-year-old boy they found face down in an alley with 3 bullets in his back. You were in Congress, fighting to cut the school lunch program." The crowd doesn't gasp. It exhales. Something silent. Something sharp. Michelle steps forward. "You thought I came here to argue. I came here to remember. And you were never ready for that." DeSantis tries to interrupt. He's trained for this. Trained for pivot, parry, punchline. But there's no line for memory. No prep for grief you didn't earn. His mouth opens. No words, and that's when it begins. Not a debate, a reckoning. He sits taller now. Ron DeSantis, the boy who learned to win by being louder than history, folds his hands in a manner he thinks resembles poise. The previous applause still lingers, in his chest like a second heartbeat. But it's shallow now, fragile. Her words haven't echoed. They've stayed, like smoke that refuses to rise. Across from him, Michelle Obama does not return his gaze. She doesn't have to. The balance of the stage has already tilted, and it has nothing to do with policy. This is not a debate. This is a reckoning dressed like television. Between them, a third figure tries to hold the illusion together. The moderator, Samuel Dry, is seasoned, too seasoned. His face is made of the same elastic neutrality used by anchors and weathermen and men who watched too much truth go unspoken. His cue cards twitch between his fingers like they know something he doesn't. His tie is too tight. His voice, when he does speak, feels like a court stenographer reading back the damage. Governor DeSantis, would you care to respond? Of course he would, but he doesn't respond to her. He responds to optics. I appreciate Mrs. Obama's passion, he begins, tone clipped with condescension too well practiced to be caught by closed captions. But anecdotes don't build policy. I deal in systems, not stories. We can't run a country on grief. There it is, the pivot, the deflection, the indictment of emotion as weakness. But Michelle doesn't flinch, doesn't lift her chin, doesn't grant him the theater he craves. She lets it sit. DeSantis pushes forward, mistaking her stillness for opportunity. I'm not here to romanticize failure. I'm here to fix it. While the left mourns, we lead. We build jobs. We protect borders. We defend police. He speaks like he's reading from stone. But stone doesn't bleed. And the people behind their screens are tired of granite men pretending to feel. Michelle's eyes rise, just slightly. That's all. It changes the oxygen in the room. She doesn't interrupt. She waits. This isn't restraint. This is strategy. The moderator interjects, fumbling for neutrality. Mrs. Obama, your rebuttal? I don't have one, she says. Samuel freezes. DeSantis squints. I didn't come to rebut. I came to remember. A long pause, and then, you talk about systems, Governor. Systems let Breonna Taylor sleep in a coffin. Systems made Trayvon walk into the barrel of a man's fear. Systems forgot Flint. Systems forgave Purdue Pharma. Systems locked up a generation of black fathers and called it justice. The word justice hangs in the rafters like a torn banner. Ron leans forward, and for the first time, his confidence begins to leak. With all due respect, Michelle, her eyes snap to his. Michelle, not Mrs. Obama, not First Lady, just Michelle. The familiarity wasn't meant kindly. It was meant territorially. He wanted to shrink her, personalize her, pull her from the mountain and plant her back in his box. But he doesn't know what he's touched. She inhales, slow and sharp. The camera cuts to her hand, clenched beneath the table. For a second, we see the moral weight cost something. You want to talk respect, Ron? She says, his name falling like a verdict. Then start by respecting. What you haven't lived, he freezes. Not visibly, but inside, something jerks backward. She continues. I buried friends from Southside gunfire while you were building platforms off outrage. I held mothers whose names you'll never say. You wave flags over graves you've never visited and dare call it policy? The audience doesn't move. Even the lights seem afraid to flicker. Samuel, the moderator, opens his mouth, then closes it. DeSantis, desperate now, plays his last familiar card. He pivots to strength. I believe in personal responsibility, he announces. Not victimhood. You can't build a nation by blaming it. Michelle tilts her head. A storm forming just behind the eyes. And yet, she says, soft, you blame immigrants. You blame teachers. You blame drag queens. You blame vaccines. You blame wokeness. You blame books. You blame athletes kneeling in prayer. You blame everyone but the people in power. Because deep down, Ron, you don't want responsibility. You want control. The silence now is uncivilized. No coughing, no clapping, just watching. Because everyone in that room, everyone watching, feels it. Something sacred is being unwrapped. Not her resume, her memory. And it has teeth. DeSantis tries to reset. This country needs order, not lectures. Michelle folds her hands, one atop the other. Order built on fear isn't order. It's obedience. That breaks him, but not publicly. His face holds, just barely. He looks to Samuel, pleading with his eyes for redirection, for structure, for anything that sounds like the next question on the card. But the moderator stares, too. Trapped. They all are. Because Michelle Obama has shifted. The ground. She has turned debate into mirror, policy into elegy, and America doesn't know how to respond to a woman not asking to be liked, but remembered. DeSantis clears his throat. Do you believe in this country? He snaps, as if the challenge will restore his footing. Her response is quiet. I loved it enough to stay when it didn't love me back. He stares. She doesn't blink. Between them, the moderator fidgets, his neutrality now clearly a mask. His voice is a whisper over static. Time for closing. But the moment doesn't close. It breathes. And Michelle. She doesn't, her final choice in this segment is not a phrase, not a smile, not even a nod. It is silence. And it is louder than his answers. Ron DeSantis leans forward again, elbows on the podium now, the choreography slipping. There's sweat at his temples, unnoticed by him but captured perfectly by camera 3. His tone sharpens, tinged not with control but urgency, the edge of something slipping. I think we all respect the former First Lady's perspective, he says, emphasizing former as if it matters. But let's not pretend silence is courage. You disappeared during the riots. You vanished when your party needed clarity. You watched cities collapse into chaos and said nothing, because you were too afraid of losing your image. The words land like thrown gravel. Small, sharp, deliberate. Michelle doesn't flinch. Not when he says, disappeared. Not when he says, afraid. But something about the word image, that one seems to echo, not outside her, but within. Her eyes soften, her hands lower, and from beneath the lectern, she produces a single document. It's folded once, then twice, worn at the creases, like it's been carried too long. The room feels it before it sees it, a rustle of something real. The audience leans in. The moderator stirs instinctively, adjusting his mic. The silence now a living presence in the room. Michelle doesn't lift it high. She doesn't dramatize. She holds it just above the podium, gently between two fingers, like it's not paper, but bone. Do you recognize this, Governor? She asks. He blinks, then squints, tries to discern from across the distance what it could possibly be. It's a letter, she continues, sent from your office in 2018, a directive to state colleges encouraging them to limit the hosting of controversial public figures, citing budget risk and civil unrest. DeSantis scoffs. I've written hundreds of letters. That doesn't mean... Michelle's voice slices through his rebuttal like wind through glass. You cited Colin Kaepernick by name, and Angela Davis, and me. The silence that follows is not disbelief. It's recognition. You said, and I quote, she says, unfolding the letter now with a kind of careful reverence, that institutions must avoid speakers who glorify dissent over order, who normalize anti-police rhetoric, and who exploit racial division for cultural capital. A gasp, subtle but collective, breaks from the audience. Not because of the words themselves, but because they were written. Because the performance has left the stage and the paper has entered. And then, softly, the past arrives. Flashback. 2 years ago, Michelle stood alone in the back hall of a Florida University after a student-led forum on racial justice was canceled abruptly, citing campus safety. She didn't come to speak. She came to sit, to listen. A junior slipped her the letter, nervously, fingers trembling, like they were handing over evidence and hoping it wouldn't explode. "My brother was going to speak too," they whispered. They told him he was too inflammatory. Michelle didn't open it then, not in front of them. She held it in her palm like a prayer she wasn't sure she wanted to read yet. That night in her hotel, she read it 3 times. Not because she didn't believe it, but because she did, and she carried it, not to retaliate, but to remember. Back to debate stage, present Michelle lays the letter flat on the podium. The camera tightens. The room holds its breath like it owes her silence. "You tried to erase voices from rooms you never intended to enter," she says. "You didn't silence radicals. You silenced students, survivors, teachers, veterans. And then you stood on stages like this and pretended it never happened." DeSantis's mouth opens. A rebuttal hovers on his lips, but falters. He remembers it now. Maybe not the exact line, but the intent, the strategy. The campaign staff that told him it would read well in suburban districts if he looked tough on divisive guests. But now the words are here, reanimated, unforgiving. Michelle steps closer, not physically, but vocally. "This isn't about a BEE letter," she says. "It's about what it revealed. You said dissent divides. You called protest dangerous. You said grief is theatrical. But grief built this country. Dissent saved it. Every inch of progress in this nation began as a disruption. The moderator doesn't move. The audience doesn't blink. Even the flags behind them seem to droop. DeSantis straightens, musters what he thinks is defiance. "I was protecting public order. We can't just allow—" Michelle cuts in, calmly, brutally. "You signed it." The sentence lands like the crack of a dropped gavel. "And then," she adds, a breath later, "you blamed the crowd for reading it." The moderator shifts, finally breaking his silence with a half-hearted cue. "Let's refocus on education." Policy. Michelle doesn't blink. She doesn't need permission from a script. She is now off script, and the stage feels it. Every movement from here is gravity pulling inward. "You talk about education, Governor," she begins. "Let's." DeSantis nods, as if ready. He thinks he knows where this goes. He has counters. Sound bites about parental rights, curriculum control, ideological balance. But Michelle's voice isn't political. It's surgical. "You cut funding to public schools while increasing allocations to private institutions with religious affiliations. You claimed it was about choice, but 87% of those new voucher recipients were already attending private schools. That's not choice. That's a subsidy for the already chosen." Ron opens his mouth. She doesn't stop. "And while you banned AP African American Studies, citing indoctrination, your own education commissioner was emailing edits to textbooks, removing any mention of police brutality and redlining." "That's a gross oversimplification," he begins, but her tone hardens. "You edited history." The audience, once comfortably aligned behind their political camps, is still now, not in protest, in discomfort. Michelle steps forward. Her voice dips, deeper, closer, undeniable. "You rewrote the word enslaved into involuntary workers. You turned children of shackled mothers into interns of fate. That's not protecting kids. That's protecting a lie." He raises his hand. "I reject that characterization. We're trying to keep ideology out of classrooms." Michelle's head tilts, not in confusion, but in pity. "Then why?" she asks, pulling another document from beneath her podium. "Did your administration push for the Bible Literacy Act in public schools? Why did you tweet that Judeo-Christian values are the bedrock of liberty? while barring Muslim advocacy groups from speaking on campuses. The words fall slowly, not shouted, placed. Ron breathes through his nose. I believe in this nation's moral heritage. Michelle interrupts. Not with heat, with memory. Flashback, 2013. Young Muslim girl, 14, hijab secured tight, sits in the back of a Tallahassee classroom. Her hands tremble as a teacher discusses radical threats to Western values. Her name isn't spoken, but her reflection is. The boy next to her mutters a slur under his breath. The teacher doesn't flinch. Her father writes a letter. The district never responds. Michelle reads it, aloud now. That letter. I found it in a stack of ignored complaints submitted to your office. No investigation. No apology. No training. DeSantis fidgets. I don't run every individual case, but you set the tone. That sentence quiets even the note-takers. Michelle doesn't look at him now. She looks into the crowd. She looks at the cameras. There are classrooms where kids don't feel safe saying their name, where books are locked away behind plexiglass, but assault rifles are sold next door without a license. That is the America you've built in pieces. Carefully, quietly. Ron tries to rewrite. We've made Florida a model of freedom. Freedom for who? She asks. He pauses. And that pause is louder than anything he says next. Flashback. 2021. Teacher resigns after being told he can't discuss climate change. A librarian is fired for refusing to remove beloved from shelves. An LGBTQ student. Alliance is defunded because state-funded spaces must remain neutral. Michelle's voice now threads these headlines through names, through faces. No one's clapping anymore. You said once, Michelle says, holding a quote from his campaign trail, the culture war is the defining fight of our time. She lets that echo. Then, no, the defining fight is truth. And you've turned truth into a battlefield where students become casualties. DeSantis doesn't argue. He smirks. It's a fatal choice. She sees it and strikes. You smile when confronted because you think the camera protects you. But legacies aren't built by optics. They're built by what survives after you. He stiffens. She finishes. Your laws will fade. Your sound bites will be forgotten. But the children who sat in silence while their truth was erased, they will remember you, not as a leader, not as a fighter, but as a man who couldn't face the consequences of his own paper trail. DeSantis starts to speak. Michelle raises a hand. One word silences him. Stop. She unfolds one final sheet. A quote. His again. He knows it. And now the world hears it again. History is what we say it is. That's how we keep America strong. Michelle looks at him, dead center, and whispers, just loud enough for the mic to catch. That's not strength. That's fear in uniform. End of section. The crowd doesn't cheer. The room doesn't move. No one laughs, because what just happened wasn't a debate. It was a legacy coming undone. The lights don't cut. The crowd doesn't cheer. The cameras keep rolling because they don't know how to stop. Michelle is gone now, her podium empty, the chair behind it still turned outward, as if someone might return. Ron DeSantis stares into the middle distance, no longer performing, just existing, unwrapped, cornered not by a political opponent, but by a memory he never thought would fight back. No one declared a winner. No one needed to, because what lingers now isn't a policy. It's a question. Would you have spoken like she did? Would you have stood there, spine unshaken, while the nation measured you not by your politics, but by your memory? Would you have said the names? Would you have named the lie? Would you have known what to do when history blinked and waited for you to answer? They called her quiet at first, unshaken, dignified. But they didn't see what she held under that silence. Letters that never got replies, children who didn't get to grow up, policies dressed in patriotism but built from amnesia. And when the use lie got that loud, what would you have said? Would you have remembered? Would you have wept? Would you have turned away? The debate ends, but this story does not. The gavel never fell. The crowd never moved, because some truths don't echo. They cling, like breath on a cold window, like smoke that never lifts, like names whispered by those who still believe remembering is the first act of justice. So now we ask you, reflect, share, remember, because power performs, but truth endures, even when the room goes completely silent.